Well, I think institutionally speaking, the presidency has an office, that trace and track budgets and policy performances. And of course, to the extent that the budget office itself is responsible for tracking the implementation of budget. So I think to a large extent it's just about the application of the principles that establish those institutions. But again, the budget is a policy. And inherent in a policy is the capacity to deliver on the objectives of the policy. So by just looking at that policy, by an evaluation of the policy, just as Prof had done, you will know if possible, a budget would likely be delivered on all objectives. To a large extent, I think if this administration has any claim to being progressive and reformist, this budget, to me, is indicating or is an exemplification of that objective. Because for the very first time, we have a clear quantum of fund allocated to capital. For the first, in fact, over these 10 years that we've been talking, past 15 years, that we're talking ratio of capital expenditure to recurrent expenditure, even when we were making so much money from crude oil sales. So now we have about 24 trillion relative to 24 trillion to capital, relative to 13 trillion recurrent. Now that's a ratio that is strange in our budgeting history. And over the past 10 years too, we have had a consistent over 3% fiscal to GDP ratio. Always. In fact, there was a time we were nearing 5%, 4.7%. So when you look at that and then, of course, link it to the MTEF, the framework on which the budget itself was conceived, the possibility of implementations are clear. $75. Historically, up till now, the rates of, the price of crude had been in that corridor.
Range, yeah.
Had not even fallen below $72 in the last 3 months. So we can say that at least we'll maintain 70, 74, 75. Production of crude oil had also been sustained at more than 1.7 million. So which means with some more efforts, we are likely to make the 2.06 million barrels a day. To a large extent, I think the currency, the foreign exchange rates as projected is clearly within reach, $1,500. Over the last 3 weeks, the range had been, at the official market, had been 1,508, 1,510. In fact, in a particular week, it went under 1,500 at 1,475 to $1. So that also is possible to achieve. So the framework itself had created a possible environment of implementation, full implementation. Then by reducing the overheads, it does mean that we must congratulate the National Assembly for doing this. It's serious work they have done, because they could have taken the budget as presented by the executive and just adopted that. But it's as if there is a consciousness of what to achieve, that let us have a break from what we used to have. 70% recurrent.
This is something new.
This is something. 70% recurrent, that's what we usually have. So let's emphasize capital. And then start moving, funds, allocation to capital. And what are those capital you are also linking? We saw a 1.5 trillion, 1.5, 1.6 trillion trillion naira allocation to the recapitalization of Bank of Industry. When I saw that, I was, wow. Now, this government really knows what it wants to achieve with its reforms. Because one, the recapitalization, the banking recapitalization, minimum is 500 billion. So you are talking about 3 times the size of the least the least recapitalized bank in Nigeria. And we are now taking that to the Bank of Industry. And of course, it also means that we are moving away from this populist off the book kind of thing, you know, the anchor borrowers program and all that. So what that tells me that really that we are not essentially talking about subsistence farming again. We are likely looking more at estate farming. And when we are doing estate farming, of course, you have mechanized farming and others, you know. And that will also most likely include processing, you know, agro-allied farms and all that. So it does mean that the government is focusing on how to address food security, which is a major, you know, concern when the inflation you are talking about. And thankfully, in our Greek, manifestation or crystallization of policies are the cycle are short. Within 6 months, if properly managed, you start seeing the first green shoots, you know, of the impact of the policy. So then you also see the linkage. For the first time, we are hearing directly about allocation to river basin authorities. So, I mean, if you have been following budgeting in Nigeria over time, there are certain things you won't be hearing. You will just know that they are in the budget. So if you have about 300 and something billion, you know, being allocated to river basin authority, and some people don't even understand what the river basin authorities are for. Exactly. You know, the budget also speaks specifically to irrigation. You know, anybody that has been following agriculture will know that if you are speaking to irrigation, you are talking about all year round farming. You know, so it would appear that the government is resolute on resolving and addressing the issues on agriculture and food, and by extension, food security. So I think to a large extent, when you take the two, the frameworks and of course the budget, the structure of the budget itself, the implementations is very, very achievable.
Okay, the implementation is achievable.